Hey, Read 508, this is Dr. Keisler, and let's get into part 2 of our discussion on Chapter 7 and talk about the way that words are learned. So, the best way for anyone to learn words, or the way that you learn the most words, is by reading a lot, right? So the amount that you read influences the differences in children's and really in anybody's vocabulary. We call this wide reading. So spending lots of time reading on your own, independent reading, and reading a variety of sources and materials. This is why we talk about in school why it's so important for kids to be reading on their own. This is exactly why. They learn more words, and when you know more words, you understand more of what you read, and when you understand more of what you read, you learn more, and then the more you learn and the more you can bring background knowledge and schema that you can bring with you, the more new information you're going to learn, right? So this is really the push for independent reading and reading lists and those reading logs that they send home. This is kind of where it comes from, even though I may not necessarily agree with sending those reading logs home. This is where those ideas kind of stem from. So what's interesting is that the rarity and variety of words in children's books is greater than that in adult conversation. So even if kids spend a lot of time listening to adults talk, or in environments where adults speak quite a bit kind of to each other or even to them, they're still going to encounter more variety of words in print than they're likely to encounter in oral language. And so we're talking about variety, right? So we tend to use the same words over and over again when we speak. So those can be very high level words, but we tend to use those same words over and over again. So we don't have as much variety in our oral language as we would have in our when we write. And even think about yourself. When you write, you really do notice when you repeat words, and repetition of words, particularly unique words or words that convey a lot of meaning, is not really well regarded as the qualities of an effective writer. And so when we put things in print, we strive to use a greater variety of words. And so kids are going to come across a greater variety of words, and they're going to come across more rare or unique words in print than they're going to encounter in conversation, whether that be with children or with adults. So if students are reading material that is at their independent reading level, then they're reading at the right level of difficulty, and so they should be able to understand a majority of the words, and then the words that they don't know the meaning of, the words around them and the context and the content that they're reading, the topic, should be familiar enough that they can apply their strategies and they can figure out the meanings of those unknown words. So what it also does is students who tend, or children who tend to read more independently, generally then have an intrinsic motivation for reading. This is kind of that idea of why I don't think the reading logs work, because you're applying extrinsic motivation techniques to try to get kids to read. And so really the most benefit of independent or wide reading comes when students are intrinsically or internally motivated to do that reading already. And so one of the reasons why that intrinsic motivation is so important when you're talking about using independent reading as a means to learn new vocabulary, to increase comprehension, is that students need to have the motivation to pursue understanding. So a kid needs to be intrinsically motivated to read on their own in order to persist through the text when they don't understand a word or they don't understand the text themselves. They need to be able to stop, apply those strategies, go somewhere to find the word, ask somebody to find what the word means. If they're not intrinsically motivated to understand what they're reading and to learn from what they're reading, then simply having them read to tick off 15 minutes on a log may improve their fluency, but it's not necessarily going to improve their comprehension or their word learning, because they'll come across that word and they'll skip because they're just trying to fill that 15 minutes. They're not necessarily intrinsically motivated to really pursue the understanding of that text or that word. So here's just an idea about how independent reading or wide reading correlates with a student's academic percentile rank. So when you look across norm-referenced tests like the NAEP or Stand 9, students that tend to perform in the 98th percentile would spend about 65 minutes a day reading from books, a total of about 67 minutes reading from some other type of text. So then the words that they read per year, look at this, so it's upwards of 4 million words a year from books, and close to 5 million from other types of text. And then compare that with students who fall into the middle percentile ranks. Look how much that drops, 65 minutes a day to 5 minutes a day. Look at how dramatically that changes. So this is, right here, this is a great visual demonstration or graphic representation of what I was talking about. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer, right? So our students who score in the 2 percentile rank don't read. There you go. Right? So this other type of text, so that they take in words from other places and they encounter them, but they are not reading books. So you can really see, and even just look at the difference between kids in the 50th percentile to the 80 to the 98th. So it's really an incredible difference. So other ways that words are learned, so multiple exposures and multiple examples. So in context, of course, but spoken and written as well. So students read words, they hear words, they speak those words, they try to write those words. That's the way that your vocabulary grows. So when you learn what a word means, and then you have the opportunities to practice that word through multiple exposures, and in a variety of ways, or if you are introduced to a word and then you can also see it used in context, you can see it written in print, you can hear your teacher, peer, or parent use it, you really then learn what that word means. And then, of course, students can learn words through explicit instruction. So constructing definitions, learning how to use resources like dictionaries, learning how to analyze word structure, understanding and exploring the relationships between words, how concepts are developed and how words relate to concepts and topic knowledge. There's also indirect learning. So just listening to storybooks or narrative text helps teach the meaning of unfamiliar words. So again, it has higher effects for students with higher vocabularies. The more words you know, the more likely you are going to pick up on words that are unique to you when you're listening. So you'll notice that you don't know that word, and then you're more likely, again, to pursue the meaning of that word. So the more words you know, the more likely you're going to learn words through listening as well. The characteristics of words impact recall and understanding of more than just the text features, right? So nouns are harder than the verbs, the adjectives, the adverbs, abstract words or abstract concepts harder than concrete or easy to visualize words. And then through active participation, right? So you probably have heard of strategies, and they discuss some in your book, of having students experience or be surrounded by words in activities like readers' theater, reciprocal teaching, where they're working with their classmates and teaching strategies and concepts to them. So these types of active word learning strategies will give them a better chance to learn new vocabulary or increase their gains in vocabulary than kind of just this passive, indirect listening to narratives or stories. But they can learn through listening comprehension. So, sorry about that. So think of ways that you learn and remember new words, right? So through becoming aware or conscious of words that you have learned, kind of knowing what you know, you can figure out how students in your class or the students that you're working with can learn words and how you can facilitate their word knowledge. So I know that me personally, I have a pretty strong foundation in morphemic analysis. So I know the meanings of lots and lots and lots of Greek and Latin roots. I understand the meaning of lots of prefixes and suffixes, which probably most of you do, but I really rely on approximation when I encounter a new word. So I look at the word that I don't recognize and I try to dissect it into its parts because I know that I have this strong foundation in word parts. And so what I do is I think about the parts that I know, and then I try to approximate a meaning. Then I go back and I use context by rereading the sentences that come before the sentence that contains that word and the sentences that come after, using my approximation, and then I see if it makes sense, right? So I use morphemic analysis and then I use context to figure out if the word means what I think it means. The interesting thing is that the more effective you are as a reader, then the quicker you do this, right? So all of this happens, within seconds inside your mind if you're a good reader. So you can, as adults, and I'm assuming that all of us in this program are good readers, you focus on the parts of words, what the words sound like, the origins, the roots of the words. How the word is being used gives you a lot of information. If you know if the word may have multiple meanings, you approximate, so other words that you think might have a similar meaning, or anything you know about those words, right? So these are probably the ways that you, like me, figure out what words mean. So let's talk kind of now about of putting this into practice. So we talked about kind of why it's important to know words, some ways that you learn words. So then how do you apply these to this idea of building students' repertoire of words and word knowledge and building their vocabulary? So we can turn to the findings from the National Reading Panel, as we do often in this course, to look for guidance on vocabulary instruction. So kind of this has held true through No Child Left Behind, and you'll get into this much more as you take Read 536, but pretty much when they talk about a research-based reading program, they're talking about a program that meets the criteria as defined by the report of the National Reading Panel in 2000. So this was the cornerstone of what they termed research-based and effective reading instruction for No Child Left Behind, and it has continued into the era of the Common Core. And so this is where we talk about those 5 areas of reading. Essentially, any program needs to address and cover and be explicit about those 5 areas of reading. So what this report essentially told us in terms of vocabulary is that vocabulary instruction leads to gains in comprehension. So there is a correlation to the amount of words you know and how much you're going to understand when you read. It should be taught directly, right? So, this means big. If you were teaching the word giant, you tell them exactly what words mean. It should be taught, students need to be taught how to use context or incidental learning, so that students, learn how to learn about figuring out what words mean, so that they learn word learning strategies. And I'm actually gonna stop us right here because I'm looking at my little clock and I'm gonna run out of time. And so I'll pick up on the next screencast to talk a little bit more about what the National Reading Panel found about discusses on vocabulary.